That's my only paper so far about corruption. And like I have this whole sequence of papers about education. So then I went into Moscow and I wrote a paper about corruption immediately. So that is not a related thing. It's just I met enough people who deal with corruption as in, academically, and they told me that that's a good enough idea to write it as a paper. I wrote it as a paper. I sent it to Journal of Public Economics. They said that you are not doing with a general enough case and it's impossible to generalize. I generalized that, sent it to a bad journal. The bad journal said it's terrible paper, throw it out. I sent it to a better journal. The better journal accepted that. So it's a bit funny history of that. And, huh?
They just hate you, that's the reason.
No, of course they do. And yeah, so I've got like 2 citations in 3 years, so people saw it, let me put it like that. So in Russian language, there is so much corruption that there is actually different kinds of corruption. So imagine you are an official and you have a discretion over allowing stuff to happen or not allowing stuff to happen. And you're kind of hired because you are competent in distinguishing bad stuff from good stuff. So you're supposed to not let bad stuff happen. You're supposed to allow good stuff to happen. So you can take 2 kinds of bribes. One kind of bribe is when you collude with the bad person and you are allowing bad stuff to happen, and you take the bribe for that. And it's clear why this is bad, right? Because bad stuff happens, and there is a reason why we don't want bad stuff to happen, because the externalities from the bad stuff, like the pollution, like, I don't know, bad electric devices that break up all the time, overweight the private costs. So if they did not, we could just, charge companies fines for that and let them go on with that. The second kind of bribery, that's when you have a person who came to you and who is planning to do good stuff, and you allow him to do good stuff. But if he doesn't pay you a bribe, you don't allow him to do the good stuff. As an example, you can think about a driver license police person, right? And he's supposed to be looking at the person saying, you're a bad driver, I'm not giving you the driver's license, right? What happens in reality is that anybody comes from the street with a big enough pocket of cash and he gets a license, and that's the collusion, right? So you got plenty of people, hitting people all the time and then, going away with that. And the other kind of bribery is when you are actually a good driver, but you didn't pay the bribe, and then he's saying, oh, you did not look in the mirror, you're a terrible driver, you will go away and come back in 3 months. So that's the surprisingly weird type of the bribery, because that kind of bribe, right, it doesn't change the allocation. So it's still, the good guy still produces stuff. It's a transfer from one guy to another. But the GDP did not change, it seems, right? So the production is the same. It's just, if you think about, the total efficiency is pretty much the same. So I'm giving a story here in the published paper about why this is a little bit more than a transfer. And recently I had a little discussion about how to combat this second type of corruption. And it turns out that an approach that seems evident to prominent people seems like working in the opposite direction if you think about the things that I'm working in here. Yeah?
What's the kind of conceptual difference between the second type
right.
of corruption you make and like tipping?
Because if you don't tip, people don't take away your food. You tip afterwards,
so
right?
And someone gives some money to a doctor to thank him. That's not the second side.
If the doctor is not gonna operate on you unless you give him a tip.
If not, he will just.
So, as in, there might be no difference, but mathematically it's because the payment happens after the realization. So yeah, we've got empirical literature, we got theoretical literature. In empirical literature, it's incredibly hard to find examples where corruption helped anything. In theoretical literature, there are stories when if you have a bad law, right, and you pay a bribe to circumvent the bad law, that might increase the efficiency. But then you have to ask where the bad law came from in the first place, right? So maybe if you don't have the bad law, maybe it would be even more efficient. So it's not really that the corruption is efficient, it's just it might be not terribly destructive while removing the inefficiency. So I haven't heard much suggestions about, having more corruption as a way to combat, bad things, but pretty much everybody agrees that we should combat corruption. Let me show you how combating corruption can help, even if you don't have the first type of corruption, even if you have only the second type of corruption, when it's just extortion from honest people. So, yeah. The approach that I have is a little bit different from the approach that people usually have. So the problem with Americans trying to do corruption models is that they perceive the corruption as these movie scenes where there is this corrupt guy and there is Al Capone with a suitcase of cash, in little, marked bills coming into. And the only thing we need to do is just to find this corrupt guy and shoot him in the head, and then we don't have any corruption anymore. Fortunately, that's not how corruption works. You have a lot of corrupt guys. Okay, you cannot shoot all of them in the head. I mean, they're just everywhere. That's the problem. So, then that's why it works. Because you know that if you want a driver's license, you need to go to a corrupt guy. You have to pay a bribe. You're not, knocking every day into the window of this police station and you're like, give me another police person. The previous one was corrupt. All of them are corrupt. It doesn't work like people think they do. So that's a problem for instance, thinking about what's the optimal bribe size. Yes?
How do you handle cases in which the laws are contradictory? So if you literally were an angel trying to enforce all the laws,
right,
nothing gets done.
So in Brazil, there is federal law about where should be your fire extinguisher, and the regional law that's about where should be your fire extinguisher. One says it should be at least 100 meters away from the door. The other says it should be at most 50 meters close to the door. So you cannot satisfy them both. And federal and regional guys are coming to check where is your fire extinguisher simultaneously. I don't handle that. I don't have empirical stuff. But that's a precise example of people extorting without any regard of whether it actually...
The second extinguisher is more expensive than the first. I would buy 2 extinguishers.
Huh?
I would buy 2 extinguishers. When it's
No, all extinguishers must be. It's not like you must... Yeah.
All of it, okay.
You have to have like quantum extinguisher or something. That exists simultaneously in 2 places. Yeah. Right. So yeah. So we have these inspectors and investors, and there is a continuum of one type of people, and there is a continuum of another type of people. So you're coming to an inspector, and I mean, you don't know whom you will encounter. You don't have a repeated interaction. This guy cannot promise you something in future. It's a one-shot interaction. So the only thing that matters is your investor's beliefs. From the point of view of inspector, again, you don't know who will come to you. You know that there will be not a lot of these guys, so everybody gets on average the same amount of people who gets to them. But again, you cannot promise the investor to do something for him in future if he does something for you now. So it's just about this one-shot interaction. So investor has a project. So some investors think about maybe they want to get a driver's license to drive the Uber, earn money, right? Some want the driver's license to, go pick up their kids from the school. Some want to have a driver's license to, street race. So the driver license person kind of have to rule out the crazy people, right? But everybody else have different returns to their investment. And some people have bigger investments. So they need to learn a lot. They need to spend a lot of time learning how to drive a car. They pass maybe the driver license of more permissions, right? And there is more demanding if you want to be a truck driver, right? So some projects are bigger and some projects are smaller. If you want, you can think about a coffee shop. If you don't want the driver license story, you can think about the coffee shop story. So you're opening a coffee shop, and when you come for a permit to sell food to people, right? When the inspector comes in and looks where your kitchen is clean, he doesn't know how much money you invested in all that. He can have a guess, right? But he doesn't know. And he doesn't know as well how much do you expect to get from that. Because if he knew everything about you, he could have opened the shop himself, right? So my point is, there are two types of heterogeneity. One is the size of the investment, and the other is the return of the investment for the investors. Inspector asks for a bribe not knowing either of two. Yeah?
Can the inspector renegotiate once he sees the returns of the project?
Well, the problem is the investor is not interested in providing too much information to the inspector. So let's say the inspector gets a signal afterwards. You can make an extension, show that there is like 2 levels of the bribes, and they could, right now, no.
And the inspector does any penalty if he is discovered in bribing?
Not in the baseline model published, but I want to talk about how to structure punishment, and yes, I am introducing that later. The same holds for the investor. He might not have an option to not give a bribe, but he can be punished for giving a bribe. And the question is, who should be punished if we want a bribe to be smaller? So yeah, here is how it works. So I had a marker somewhere in here. So you have an investor. He learns his K. He comes up with a project of Hinkalnaya, and that's the amount of K he needs. Or he comes up with a project of, a fancy restaurant, and that's a different K. He learns his K. He knows that there is a return distributed with some sort of the law on his investment. I assume it's independent from K, so it's just he earns RK. He knows R, he doesn't know K yet, so he makes an investment. Invest, don't. That stops. He invests, so there appears an inspector. So inspector here doesn't know R, doesn't know K, knows who invests. Okay? He has beliefs about who can come to him. He chooses a continuous bribe. How do I use S? S, I think I use everywhere. Give me that amount of bribe, says the inspector. Give me $1 million. You can play here games again. You can say, maybe it's a function of K, maybe it's a linear function of K, yada, yada. Let's stop at the constant first. And then again, you have the investor. He just finished building his restaurant. He sees people passing by the street. Some people come in, say, when are you going to be open? He learns stuff about R. So you can pay or don't pay. Right? So here the inspector gets 0. If you don't pay, again the inspector gets 0, but the investor loses his investment. And that's why some people don't want to invest if they expect a bribe. Right? If he does pay a bribe, he earns the return on his investment. He pays a bribe, and he pays the investment. So that's the total payoff, and that's the transfer from the investor to the inspector. Is that getting clear? Notice that the decision from here to here does not depend upon the amount of investment. It depends upon the return, but does not depend upon the amount of investment. That's a sunk cost at this point. It depends on the returns. So you will pay the bribe if R is bigger than S over K. Right? So if you have a bigger project, you're going to pay the bribe. Only the biggest firms start up. Who has ever been outside of Moscow could have noticed how many independent cafe places are there in European cities. So there are places that are unique. They are small and they have their own clientele. When you go to Moscow, there is a lot of networks. You cannot survive in Moscow if you're a small company. Just don't start. Yeah?
Does it mean that the investor knows the amount of bribe at the beginning?
He has expectations, yes, and they are consistent with that because that's how the equilibrium works. So inspector here says, well, I can ask the bribe of S, right? And I will get that if R will be bigger than S over K. If I increase S, this number will be smaller. Whatever is the R and K and whatnot, charging a bigger bribe lowers my probability. I have an interior solution. I'm never gonna ask a zero bribe, right? But I won't ask an infinity bribe as well. How does it work? So let's say there is no heterogeneity about K. All projects are of the same size. It's the driver license for an individual person who wants to drive a usual normal car. So this is the density of return. And this is the current bribe size. So K equals to 1. Right? These guys don't pay a bribe. These guys pay a bribe. And that's the amount of total bribe paid. Right? Everybody paid the same bribe. What happens if you increase S? You have an increase in here, this rectangle. You collect that. But you lose this rectangle. So your optimal bribe will combine. I need to remember which way is that. I'll practice that for some time. There we are. 1 minus F, that area, over F. The height of the density in here. Okay? So S over K, 1 over K. If you have heterogeneity with respect to capital, you have a picture like that for every value of capital. There might be a continuum of values of capital, so you integrate over all of these things. Mathematically, it looks ugly, but for people who know probability theory, it's very easy. So you have the average that area over the average that area. Yes?
Sorry, it's a small left number, right?
in the...
Small f in here, yes, yes. So that's, without this heterogeneity with respect to k, that's called the inverse hazard rate.
You
Okay.
assume a distribution that has monotonic one, right?
Not necessarily, not yet. Coming back to your question. This is a choice of a inspector who has this expectation about who is coming to him, right? So he says, if I choose that S, I can compare this ratio, and if I get exactly the same S, that's a correctly chosen S. At the beginning in here, investors also have an opinion about who will start investing. So the equilibrium bribe is such that some people start investing. Based upon who start investing, the bribe forms. The bribe is such that the expectations of investors at the beginning are consistent with what is actually happening. Right? So let me draw some pictures. So we had this equation S equals to 1 over K F R S over K 1 minus F R S over K. This is S, this is S, this is the 45-degree line. Okay? How does that look like? That's a function of S. If you don't have heterogeneity with respect to K, right, you can pretty much calculate that. If you assume monotonicity of 1 over f of r of x over f r of x, and there are classes of distributions for which this is monotone. A lot of distributions have this monotonicity. In particularly, decreasing inverse hazard rate is very widespread. So normal distribution has a decreasing hazard rate. Uniform distribution has a decreasing hazard rate. There are few exceptions. Log normal is not everywhere decreasing, but plenty of them are. So if it's decreasing, you know that it's going to look something like blah. Right? So you have an optimal bribe. You don't need it to be decreasing. Blah. That's an optimal bribe. Right? As long as it's not increasing too much, not increasing too quickly, you can be pretty sure there is a unique solution. There is a unique equilibrium, and you can analyze what happens with stuff if you change something. Like the size of the capital. What will happen if you change the size of the capital? This line will move in some predictable way. Okay? Now, what happens if it has double intersections? Right? Have multiple equilibria. This is an equilibrium and it's stable. This is an equilibrium and it's not stable. This is an equilibrium and it's stable. This is the equilibrium and it's not stable. Maybe there are other equilibria. If you move your case one way or another, you might lose some of that equilibria. So if this line goes a little bit below, these two equilibria might disappear. If you move it temporarily a little bit lower, you might jump from, say, this equilibrium to this equilibrium.
So the unstable equilibrium is the threshold to decide to which stable equilibrium you move in this moment?
Not at all.
Not at all.
You don't have to have difference in K. It's just the beliefs about S that drives everything. Okay? So, yeah. All right. But even if you had this monotonicity thing, I don't have the eraser for some reason. It's probably somewhere else. It's in your computer. Let me delete that. Return your 45-degree line. If you have heterogeneity with respect to K, if even if you had monotonicity assumption, this thing doesn't have to be monotone. That's not the average hazard rate. If it was expectation with respect to k of the fraction, that would be decreasing if each individual k was decreasing. Because you have expectation over expectation, this doesn't have to be decreasing. So you can have multiple equilibria. And so you can have this kind of stuff. But when you have different k's, the point where you don't start your project is different for two kinds of sizes of the project. So you have this threshold in here, for instance, where you just give up. The small guys don't start their projects. Only the big guys start their projects. The bribe is bigger than that. So it's a line in here. And in here, it just jumps up because here are only the big guys, and the big guys are much more eager to pay the bribe because they earn much more. Okay? So equilibria here are not just different about the size of the bribe anymore. They are also different about who is starting their projects. So if you are in this equilibrium and you are a small guy, you don't start your project because you know you will be asked for too much money. Let's say you did anyway and you started your project. You come to the inspector and you say, hi, I'm a small guy, I want to open my shoe shining shop. Inspector says, I don't believe you. I know that 100% of people start up their projects if they're big, and 0% of them start if they're small. I don't believe you that you're small. It's profitable for you to make me believe that you're small because I will have to ask you a smaller bribe. But I know who is starting projects. You gotta be a big guy. So give me $1 million. You might be able, you might not be able, but it's not optimal for you to start the project in the first place. Now, you have this curve, and it responds to, for instance, if you have, police coming at everybody's door and, looking for corrupt people, you might actually lower your bribe, right? I'm not going to model right now how exactly. So if you lower the bribe a bit up to here, you can have a bunch of small guys starting up their projects. And that will change the beliefs of the inspectors, because now they have a bunch of small guys coming up to them. Right? Their beliefs will break. They can come up with a learning model that will show how exactly the dynamics will unravel. How much time do you need to keep this, crack down on corruption? But you can go from this equilibrium to this equilibrium. Why is this cool? Everybody pays a smaller bribe, right? So those who were paying the bribe before, they are paying a smaller bribe now. They are better off. Everybody who were giving up their project because they couldn't afford the bribe now start their projects, right? Because they are charged a smaller bribe. Yes?
Why would the crackdown on corruption increase the bribe? Because in many cases it's the opposite. I crack down on corruption and increase the marginal cost for the corporation.
I'll go to the details about how exactly to fight corruption in a second. But you understand what I was meaning. If you have an opportunity to lower the bribe a little bit somehow with a crackdown or with advertising campaign or whatever, right?
You can defer this if you want, but I keep looking at this and wondering, why does it have to do with corruption? Couldn't this model easily be extended to a situation in which you have some kind of complementary input into some kind of production function? Imagine the inspector's Apple, and they're deciding whether to allow them on their, say, to be used the iPlay or whatever, like an app. And then they're trying to extract rents, but they're letting you through it. So depending on how they're going to price the apps, allowing it in. But they're trying to extract more. If you're very big, they want to create app stores so that it's quite expensive and millions of people go through. And they have the right to charge different amounts depending on what kind of company you are. But if you're a big enough company under certain conditions, you'll put in certain kind of investment, for example, will match it. I'm saying you can think about this. I think this model is far more general than
Absolutely. But with my model, I can show you that everybody is better off from the smaller bribes. Right. And I don't mean everybody investors. I mean everybody inspectors.
Right.
Oh.
Right? Right? Because why? Because if you are a small guy, now you start up your project and you on average earn a positive amount of money. right? Even if you will lose sometimes, ex ante you will be better off. But think about the inspectors now. They are getting a lower bribe per person, but they are getting much more people who apply, right? If it was optimal, if they would earn more money by charging a bigger bribe, that would be their optimal choice. But their optimal choice isn't here, right? So my point is, I can show you that getting rid, or at least lowering the bribe in this extortion, if it stimulates market participation, hence the title of my talk, Decentralized Bribery and Market Participation. Making it smaller, making it weaker, might actually improve the situation for everybody. And these are the stories about the beneficial corruption in, Asian countries when there is bakshish and you give a guy a little present, and that looks like a corruption from the Swedish point of view, but it kind of makes everything go faster. Right? So it's not, this is better than this. Maybe getting rid of that would be even better. Right? But already, let's go from here to here. That would be a good improvement. GDP improvement. Yeah?
Just one little catch up, because I don't know it's
sure.
last lecture. So there will be more businesses going into the market, right?
Yeah.
And everyone wins because it's more productive, right?
Well, small guys win because they now start up and their average earnings are bigger than zero. And big guys win because they pay lower bribes. Yes.
But then inspectors will be also happy because they
Yes.
go to more things.
That's what I was saying. Everybody's better off.
Isn't it like, inspector has his own laws. He cannot go to all businesses. Normally, more businesses, more inspectors. So
You would be amazed how efficient are people when they just need to go to places and collect money.
okay, just wondering.
There are, jobs where you collect money from people and do nothing, and that's
Yeah, well,
very popular jobs, very popular jobs. Have you read anything about what are they called, the debt collectors? Very motivated people. Like, burning down the houses of those who are supposed to pay the debt and all this kind of stuff. So, very inventive.
Okay, well, I just know that when the fire inspection, more businesses open and the fire inspections
Right.
still the same number of people, then they don't count that much often. And it was judged that the bribe, but now they don't think that much.
Well, they will have to invent something like pay with the phone or something. So, they'll figure it out. Question there, yeah.
Usually can observe the fact that anti-corruption policies can encourage inspectors to charge more amount of bribes. So, is it correct in this model?
Quantity. Yeah, they will charge more bribes, but each of the bribe will be smaller, and the total earnings for them will be bigger, and the load on individual project will be smaller.
In other words, do we need some anti-corruption policy in this case?
It's better than being in here.
Yes, but more bribes are paid, but every individual firm is likely to pay bribe doesn't change. It's just more firms.
Exactly.
It's true entry, right?
Exactly.
That's the
Exactly. Exactly.
It's a sort
Yep.
of entry fee.
Yep. Coming back to your point about I forgot. I'm old. I don't remember stuff. It's terrible. Yeah. Anyway, I was saying that we want to lower the bribe. How do we lower the bribe? There is a guy called Kaushik Basu who used to be the prime minister, finance minister of India. John, do you remember?
Which one?
Kaushik Basu.
What about?
Was he president? Was he prime minister or finance minister?
No, maybe finance culture. He was never prime minister.
Okay. So his suggestion in India was that, we have these bribes and we want to persecute them. And in this specific case of extortion, exactly what I study in here, it seems that people don't want to report them because they will be punished for the bribe, right? So how about we don't punish people for giving a bribe and we'll only punish people for taking a bribe, okay? Then those who give, because they are forced to give a bribe, right? They will report it more frequently. So we will see better who is taking a bribe and we will be more efficient in punishing bribes. And of course that, in the country where people have been punished for, the bribe giving is a bad action. People spend a lot of effort in convincing people that bribe giving is not a good thing to do. But then you're coming out and you're saying, let's not punish them anymore. That's already meeting some opposition, right? But then you're like supposed to be writing about your, local policeman and local doctor and whoever. People don't like writing on each other. I mean, there are studies about how the people relate to copying of homeworks from each other, and cultures tend to have different attitudes to different misbehaviors. So reporting people who, I don't know, your doctor for, taking your cognac for, fixing your eye, that's, people frown upon that. So there were a bit of backlash coming from these ethical people, decided like stigmas and whatnot. I took my model and I introduced penalties into there. How penalties change things. So depending upon what is this penalty. In here, Paul asked, do you get punished? I'm saying there is a probability that you get detected. And if you get detected, inspector pays PSI and investor pays fee.
So they share the penalty?
I don't know, one of them might be negative. Okay, they don't have to sum up to 0. They don't have to do anything. It's just, that's the expected penalty that they get in terms of lifetime in prison, in terms of whatever. So what changes? What changes is that this gets a S plus Q fee plus Q fee, and that gets a Q psi plus everything. So your fee moves your everything to the left. So that's an increase in the penalty for the bribe giver. And your psi moves your line up. That's the penalty for your bribe getter. Let's say we don't have this multiple equilibria stuff. Let's say we have only one equilibrium. Well, we want to change psi and phi a little bit, right? Looks something like that. This is your bribe. You move this line up. What happens to the bribe? Right? You start punishing your bribe takers, and your bribe goes up. Why? Because now the bribe must include the expected punishment for the bribe. Right? Exactly. Well, there is no risk. There is, it's functioning as a risk premium, but you have to compensate for that, and then the hazard rate adds a little bit one way or another, but it still goes up. Okay? Now you increase fee, and you move this line to the, to where? To the left. Yes. Okay? Your bribe goes up again. You punish people for bribery, and the bribe goes up. I remembered what I wanted to talk about. Think about the data that you have about corruption. What do people use as a measure of corruption? I don't know about your sophisticated method, but the usual stuff what people do is they go and ask like, how corrupt is your country? And it's from 1 to 10, and people say like 6. And I'm not sure how to compare that between, you know, different countries. And what was your?
This is you're saying
right.
the perception of corruption,
right.
while the Goldman Pitchy index is on real data about infrastructure,
right.
difference in the engineer cost and the realization cost.
I see, I see. So like a markup that ends up getting a bit. Now think about this Pareto improvement that I was mentioning. More people pay bribes, okay? Doesn't sound like a good measure, as in, you know, if people think that, you know, bribe paying quantity is a bad thing, right? This Pareto improvement in data looks like there is more corruption. What else can you use? Inspectors become richer. They collect more bribes, right? If you ask about, you know, the foreign ownership of your tax officials, right? they will go up. That's gonna look as if, there is more corruption. But there's actually less corruption. The load of corruption on the economy became smaller. Come back into here. We increased the penalty. The bribe went up, right? Less people pay. It might be less people, it might be more people. Less people pay the bribe. Is that a good thing? No, because you have less projects at the end of the day. The GDP goes down, right?
I find the real surprise is that if you make the corporate official pay, it's logical that bribe goes up because that's like the marginal cost.
Exactly.
But if you make the other side pay,
Right.
it also goes up. That's
Right.
surprising. It's like a willingness to pay and it should go. So that's the real surprise for me.
Let me surprise you even further. Remember I said that it can increase, it can decrease. Let's see what happens if it decreases. Increase the penalty for the bribe giver. Okay? If you punish the guy who is paying the bribe can go up and the bribe can go down, depending upon the local shape of that function at the point of the bribe. Why can it go one way or another? Precisely because it's connected to the slope of this line. Why this line can go up or down? Why does it go up? It's clear why it goes down, right? Because there is less and less people who are eager to pay the bribe. But why can it go up? It only goes up in this case, in case of monotonic hazard trade, because the bigger is a bribe, the more likely it is that the guy who's paying the bribe is of the high type. So if you charge a very big bribe, only big guys are eager to pay that bribe. So an increase in bribe leads to bigger expected bribe if you increase it a little bit more. Okay? So there are two effects for the bribe payers. One is that some people fall away, but the other is the expected bribe that you collect from the rest of them. And you only care about the rest of them because you have only beliefs about who will come to you. People don't have discretion about which inspector to go to. They get assigned an inspector. So your own individual choice of the bribe does not really affect anything. It's the equilibrium choice of the bribe that makes people eager to pay a higher bribe on average. It's less people who have a higher bribe on average, but because you as an individual inspector don't have any influence about how many people are going to come over, okay, you might actually have this increasing thing. So how do you make the bribe smaller? You make the penalty for the inspector very, very, very small. You make it negative. Okay? You award inspectors for doing the right thing. Some people call it per piece salary. As in, you have a guy who wants to pass a driving test. Right? He passes the driving test. Give the freaking inspector some money. Right? Don't pay him the monthly salary. Pay him per passport, pay per license salary. He would be interested in giving you the permit. Okay, right now he's not interested in giving you the permit, and he has a right not to give you the permit. And he can extract money from you. If he instead can extract money from the government, he'll be happy to do that. Right? And there won't be issues with participation. Should you punish the bribe givers? It might be helpful, it might be hurtful. And there is a very weird thing that you need to study. If you increase the bribe a little bit, what's going to happen with the distribution of the remaining projects that would still be eager to pay a bribe? Now think about what Basu wants you to do. He wants you to put this penalty to 0. Right? And he wants to jack up this thing because increasing Q, increasing the probability of detection, is jacking up this thing effectively. The bribe will go up. Right? He will not get rid of corruption. So why did he not know that? Because he wrote text Why do you write models? Because you take the idea from the text and you make it clear what's going on in there. If I am right, if people make a decision about whether to start a project based upon expectations of corruption, Basu's proposal will backfire, even without all the ethical considerations, even without all the stigma and whatever. Just purely maximizing the expected revenue, without any risk aversion, without anything. One-shot game, just extortion, no collusion, right? You don't have to have heterogeneity with respect to capital. You get a very strong prediction that if you make the official pay a lot of money in penalties, he's gonna put that on top of the bribe that he was charging you at the beginning. So yeah, I almost ran out of time. I have time for 2 questions. Okay? Questions?
So, oh, sorry, no.
No, it was just a little comment. So it looks like everyone should get the driving license. I mean, mine.
Yeah, I assume away bad drivers, just like Basu does in his proposal, yes.
No, I mean, like, everyone should just get a driving license in the first place.
Yes and no. As in reality, there is this other type of corruption that might add more issues to your optimal choice of the fine. But Basu's proposal was explicitly about extortion. So I'm dealing exactly with Basu's proposal.
Isn't it possible to find just a bit different example?
No, I have this prominent guy who said a stupid thing and I want to yell at him. But in general, I wrote up a model with bad people who are choosing between, well, not bad, but your investors can choose whether to start a project in a nice fashion or in a bad fashion. And choice of the fine structure for extortion and for corruption actually affects the position of the threshold, whether you start your project in a nice way or in a bad way. So there is much more interactions. I cut them all out for the ease of presentation. I mean, I spent an hour explaining that model with like 1 bribe and 2 penalties. It would be another hour for the other part. More questions? Andrei?
So, why don't we, like, can there be some signal, some signaling?
Yes, if the inspector gets a signal about the size of the project, he might have 2 bribes.
Yeah.
Bribe for the big signal and bribe for the low signal. It doesn't kill the perverse equilibrium in here. Why? Because if the inspector thinks that only the big guys are starting up his project, he will not care about your signal. He will not learn anything about your signal. You might be the small guy and you might bring the small signal, but because the inspector thinks you're the big guy, he will say, yeah, big guys sometimes get small signals, so I don't care. You're a big guy, give me $1 million.
But how is it different from standards menu model? When we
I don't know. I think it is a standard menu model.
Okay, but
No, yeah, you apply the literature from the menu kind of stuff and you get 2 bribes if there are 2 types opening up the projects, and you get only 1 bribe if there is only 1 type opening his project.
But then it's kind of like almost everywhere we consider just standard like monotone puzzle. It's ready and it's not that interesting.
Well, you have issues if you are not sure what. So even if you have a signal, unless it's a perfect signal,
Like
you might.
Calls, right? Okay.
It's not that easy.
So what should you do then? Assessment policy.
In terms of fighting extortion, with ignoring collusion, reward people for each license they issue. Like make a salary a function of how much licenses they issue. Make them compete for licenses. Then you have issues about like them asking their friends to submit for a license.
But this is close to this whole, it's like officially corruption without trust. Right, you have many guys and they basically sell the license.
And I'm sending that to infinity, right? But the difference is they are not talking about the choice between 2 guys. They are saying there are 2 guys and you have to get a bribe for one and the bribe for another, and it's going to be bigger than if you have only 1 guy. I have a kind of a competition model, but not really.
It seems that if you want to give the bribe, the small bribe to the inspector, you needed to relate it, to tie it to something which is observable, like a light.
Sure, like signal from,
Yes,
yeah.
otherwise,
Actually, that's another story. If you go to a Moscow restaurant, it's always cramped. There is never a restaurant where you can move around your chair without hitting somebody. Have you noticed that? They always try to look very, very small. But please go on.
no, this could be somehow a limit of the model, or you suggest something different.
Well, I contemplated this signaling in the terms of, does it kill the bad equilibrium where small guys do not start? And no, it doesn't. You still have the crappy equilibrium. Your other equilibrium, where everybody starts, becomes a little bit better, as in, well, not a little bit better. I mean, it's better for the small guy and worse for the big guy, because big guys now pay bigger bribes. It doesn't have to be Pareto improving, but it doesn't break my model as long as signals are not perfect. So you can think about my model as, what happens if the signal is the same for all of these guys? Yep.
Yeah. When you talk about Q being the same across the line, it is there is probably technical.
Yeah, you can make Q a function of S. Yeah, absolutely.
Problem that when you have a lot of small bribes,
Right.
the probability of being caught goes up. So there is additional policy implications.
I did
that
not.
Probably you should go.
I did
for
not
big guys and
implicitly. I did not implicitly explain how do you get assigned cases. You might be just working in a big, Moscow, where you have 200 applicants per day. You might work in a small region where you have like 1 applicant. Here, my guys do not care because they maximize the expected revenue per person, because they maximize the total revenue, and in each individual case they charge the same bribe. So I might as well ask them to maximize a bribe for each individual person who comes to them. But when you start thinking about punishing, you start thinking about how do you get assigned like to be in a place with 200 people per day, and how do you get assigned to people with 1 applicant per day. And you start thinking about maybe there is a market going on there, and there is a Misha Drugov guy who is doing something about that. More questions? Nope. Thank you very much for coming. Now, the part with multiple equilibrium participation was published in Scandinavian Journal of Economics. The other part, I read Basu's proposal. I figured, why don't I see how I can adjust that to address Basu's proposal? So that's why you read Scandinavian Journal of Economics and think about stuff, because you can get other papers from that. Do you know what's the European Economic Association? The part about Basu's proposal was accepted for European Economic Association. So it might not get published in the ER, but you can come up with good ideas, even if they are like 2 pages long.
You will be in Geneva.
Yeah. Are you coming?
No, but Geneva.
Oh, good. Good.